Greetings, people of the interwebs, Jake here, and as you can tell by the title of this video, I'm going to be talking about the War of the Rohirrim trailer. So I'm going to kind of watch a little bit of it as I talk about it, which first off, I like that they open up with scenes from the Two Towers in Rohan, which makes sense. I think, one, it's a good way to pull in, like, the casual people who don't know that this is set in the same universe as the Lord of the Rings trilogy, unlike Rings of Power. Which less said about that, the better. But I do like that it starts off with a few scenes from Rohan, like Gandalf and Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and all of them. Some Eowyn shots. One thing that I think is interesting, though, about this is when it shows the map of Rohan. So Helm's Deep is labeled as Helm's Deep, which does make sense, and I think it was probably just labeled that way for simplicity's sake. But actually in this timeline, because this story takes place 200 years before the events of The Lord of the Rings, and so the Helm's Deep would actually be called Soothburg, which is just South Fortress in Rohirrim. Doesn't get the name of Helm's Deep until after this story takes place, about Helm Hammerhand. So anyways, just little side note there. But obviously, as it kind of transitions from scenes from the Lord of the Rings trilogy into the animated version, that's when we see, which really love just the visuals of this. And also, as a big anime fan ever since I was a kid, this just checks so many boxes, because obviously I love Lord of the Rings. It's my all-time favorite movie, all-time favorite book series, along with the Silmarillion, which is probably my all-time favorite, but digressing. And then, of course, anime, like I said, I've been a huge fan of since I was a kid, so this, to me, just seems like a perfect combination. And I love the art style, the animation for this. So, yeah, checked a lot of boxes. I'm looking forward to it. And again, love the visuals and the attention to detail in a lot of these scenes, which, again, does make sense because this is obviously the same world, and brought to the same, Philippa Boyens, Fran Walsh, and Peter Jackson all were involved with this series, same with the ones, they're the ones who brought the Lord of the Rings trilogy to life. But I still appreciate the insane amount of detail where, like, the first shot where we see Helm's Deep, and then later on in this trailer where you see the interior of the Middlesild, which is the Golden Hall in King Théoden's palace, basically. If you notice, for those of you who have bothered to watch this trailer a lot, and who know the interior of the live-action, Lord of the Rings, it's identical. Like, the throne room that Helm sits on in this trailer is the same exact design as what Theoden sits in. Same thing with, like, Helm's Deep. And, like, even the tiling in the floor inside the Middlesild. Again, it makes sense because it's the same people who are making or involved with this movie as The Lord of the Rings. But I still love the attention to detail because clearly the animators had to rewatch those scenes probably over and over and over, frame by frame by frame, so that way they could perfectly match, or at least get as close as possible to matching the aesthetic and the visuals, like with, like, the designs on, like, the columns in the interior of Middlesild, the design of, like, Théoden's throne / Helm's throne, and all that stuff. So I do not envy those people, because I imagine, again, they had to spend extensive time watching those scenes, again, frame by frame, just that way they know the different designs and all that stuff, so that way they can make it as accurate as possible. So again, just a little side tangent there. So then we see the scene where we have Helm talking to his soldiers, and I'm pretty sure the gentleman in the far right is either Hama or Haleth, which are his two sons. Not sure which one that is exactly, but it looks like he's kind of giving a rousing speech, not too dissimilar from Theoden's speech in The Lord of the Rings, the Return of the King, which I'm all for. And again, also the incredible score by Howard Shore at the beginning. Fantastic. Now, another thing that's a little interesting is, so in that scene where before Helm charges off, he's wielding a warhammer. So, even though in the lore, it's never specifically stated that he wielded a warhammer, the reason why he got, well, I'll get into the nickname later at one of the next scenes, but I do think it's fitting that he does wield a warhammer, because typically in a lot of, like, fan art and even in the scene in the Two Towers when they reach Helm's Deep, there's that statue of Helm where he's wielding a hammer. So, again, I think that's just kind of cool, keeping with the aesthetic that Helm typically is always depicted, whether it be official Lord of the Rings like scenes like in Two Towers or just like fan art and stuff like that. Then again, like the scene where it shows the metal sailed looks exactly like it does in the Two Towers and the Return of the King. Now, so again, we see Freka enter the Golden Hall. So we see Helm sitting in his throne, Haleth and Hama, his two sons, and then to his left, that's Hera, who's the main character of this story, which I've seen a lot of kickback from people on the internet, kind of not liking the fact that, like, Hera, who actually in the lore was unnamed. Like, Helm had a daughter, but Tolkien never wrote down a name for her. But, and another little side tangent here, I do like the fact that, because his sons, Hama and Haleth, they kept an H. The only difference is Hera is actually, I believe, if I remember correctly from the interview with Philippa Boyens, is... So it's of Icelandic origin, whereas Hama, Haleth, Helm, a lot of the names of, actually pretty much all the names of the Rohirrim are all Anglo-Saxon names. But they wanted to keep with that H theme, like, again, Helm, Hama, Haleth. And so they still wanted to go with, like, a name that had a similar, that fit really well. And also, again, Icelandic is still a Germanic language. North Germanic, Anglo-Saxon is West Germanic. Again, digressing. But I also just like the fact that they tried to keep with that theme. Just I like the tiny details like that. Also, a little side note that I find interesting is, so the Rohirrim are pretty much always depicted with blonde hair. And again, Hama, Haleth, blonde hair. Helm would have blonde hair, but obviously he's much older, so gray. Hera, on the other hand, is a ginger, which, as a ginger myself, I appreciate. And I'm all for seeing representation of gingers all across the board in any kind of medium, whether it be anime, live action, whatever it may be. I just thought it was interesting that they decided to make her ginger rather than keeping with the blonde hair theme. And maybe they did that intentionally just to kind of make her stand out a little bit more. Not entirely sure. But yeah, so a lot of side tangents there. So then, of course, we see Freka enter along with his son Wolf. And Freka, again, in the lore, he is trying to make a marriage proposal to Hera with his son. But obviously, Helm is kind of dubious of that, because one, Freka is, which I guess another thing too with Freka is, so obviously you can see that he's got dark hair. And it's speculated, and I don't recall exactly off the top of my head if Tolkien explicitly stated, but it's speculated that Freka, being dark of hair, was actually of Dun Landing descent. Which, again, would kind of make sense just because the land that he ruled over was close to Dunland, so there was a lot of, like, mixing between, like, the Rohirrim and the Dunlandings towards the west of Rohan. And that was another reason, too, I guess, like, some of the, like, Helm and some of the other Rohirrim were a little bit more dubious of Freka's intentions, because he did have Dunlanding heritage. Rightfully or wrongfully, which I guess that's another thing, the two that I find interesting about this story of Helm Hammerhand is he's not as morally sound as Theoden in, The Return of the King and Two Towers, or other noble figures in Tolkien's work. He's a very... Because, like, the whole incident with this kind of breaks out between Frek and Helm. One could argue both are pretty much at fault. Like, it's not like Freka was purely the aggressor here. But again, that's why I'm kind of interested to see this story kind of come to fruition and see their take on this, which it does seem like they're trying to take a more... not try to paint, like, Helm as, like, this great, stoic, heroic hero, who's completely flawless or anything like that. And then, of course, we get this scene with Wolf and Hera talking, which I think it does make sense that the two would know each other, just because, again, Freka being a lord of Rohan, obviously there would be, like, council meetings, stuff like that, so totally fine, makes sense. And, of course, we get this great scene with Freka and Helm duking it out. Helm just taking the hits, and then he delivers his famous blow, which kills Freck in one hit. And that's where he actually gets the nickname Helm Hammerhand, because he basically struck Freck like a hammer with his fist and killed him. And that's basically what escalates this whole ordeal, because obviously there were some tensions beforehand, but then that was kind of the final straw, and that's basically what starts the whole War of the Rohirrim in the lore and obviously in this movie. So they've got some flashback shots of Hera and Wolf. Looks like she's trying to talk him down. Probably, I'm assuming this takes place after her father, Wolf's father is killed, and she's maybe trying to talk him down, try to prevent war from happening, using their past friendship to maybe help talk him down and convince him to not start a war. But at this point, it's kind of things have gone too far. I think some cool action sequences of like the archers, the Mumakil breaking through Edoras. And another thing too that I've seen a lot of people kind of complain about, seeing the shots of Hera galloping and kind of talking about how she's her father's fastest rider. Same people are kind of kicking back saying like, oh, she's like a Mary Sue and stuff like that, which could end up being the case where maybe she is just this like very overpowered female character, like a lot of big movies and shows have kind of unfortunately had a problem with. However, I'll kind of push back though, is because it was even stated in the Two Towers when Eowyn said that the Shieldmaidens of Rohan, they know how to fight, and so I'm okay with like Hedda being the main character and also being capable of fighting. Also, another thing too with why I think it makes sense for her, this kind of unnamed character in the lore, to be the central figure, is because, I guess if you're not familiar with the story of Helm Hammerhand, minor spoiler, so Helm dies along with his two sons Ham and Haleth. And so it's a little hard to tell a story where your main character, again, if they wanted to have Helm be the main character, dies. Kind of, I mean, I don't know, you could still do that story, but I imagine in this movie, Helm is probably going to end up dying maybe in the second act. And then actually, Freyalof, his nephew, is the one who takes up the mantle of King of Rohan. There's another little interesting tidbit, little side note too, is the shots where we see Helm wearing his crown, it's a different crown than what Theoden wears. And so I don't know if that was just like done as an aesthetic choice, or if maybe like in lore, just like something that they're doing, is maybe like each new dynasty kind of gets their own crown, which I think would actually make sense, because Theoden is the second dynasty of the Kings of Rohan. Because after Helm dies, that kind of ends the first line of Rohirrim kings. But again, another little side tangent there. So of course some cool shots here of like the siege of Helm's Deep, and Hera talking to an old lady, not sure who she is or is supposed to be. Now, one scene that I'm a little mixed about is this scene where we see Hera running from one of the Mumakil. So the Mumakil, they come from Harad, and it doesn't seem to have like any riders and anything like that. So maybe it's like a Mumakil that escaped and is just kind of roaming free. But then we see like this big tentacle creature, presumably like it looks like the Watcher in the Water from the Fellowship, that attacks the Fellowship as they're entering the mines of Moria. So either one, Hera has somehow found her way very far north, right outside the gates of Moria, or two, and I'm kind of leaning more towards this, is that this creature that resembles the Watcher in the Water, which also looks a little bit different with its design, at least the color schemes, and also has a tree on top of it. What I'm assuming they're doing is this is just another creature like the Watcher in the Water, which Tolkien never really specified what it was. It's presumed to be the Nameless Ones, which are like these just ancient creatures that live deep, like super deep in the earth. Then their soul that not even Sauron knew about them. So that's kind of my speculation, is that this isn't the Watcher in the Water, this is just a similar creature like it. So even though this scene looks really cool in the trailer, I don't know, I'm a little mixed on that, just because I think in a way if like the nameless things, like creatures like this, are I guess more prevalent, even if there are just like two that we've seen of the Watcher in the Water than this creature. I don't know, it still kind of like maybe takes a little bit of the mysticism away, but maybe that's just me. But still a cool scene. Now, I'm not sure where Hera's climbing that ice wall. Not sure where that is, other than somewhere in the White Mountains behind Edoras. But where specifically, not entirely sure. So you get this cool shot of like a cavalry charge, and I'm assuming that's the same ravine that Gandalf and Eomer charge down in the Two Towers towards the end when they break the siege of Helm's Deep. At least that's what it looks like to me. Then, of course, we get some cool fight scenes between Hera and Wolf, which I'm assuming that's probably going to be in the third act of the movie when Hera probably defeats Wolf and, ends the siege of Helm's Deep. But anywho, that more or less wraps up this trailer, and then we get this last shot of an orc talking about, collecting rings, which is kind of interesting. I'm sure that was probably just done to just kind of further emphasize that it does take place in the same universe as the Lord of the Rings movies. And maybe just kind of like foreshadow that, Sauron's still working his evil in the background. But anywho, so that's the trailer and kind of like my very rambly thoughts. Overall, I did really enjoy the trailer. It shows a lot of promise to me, and I'm a lot more hopeful for this than I am with Season 2 of The Rings of Power, which just recorded a video, I think it was like 2 days ago at the time of this recording, on my thoughts and speculations of the Season 2 for Rings of Power, which, spoiler alert, they're low, but you can check out that video anyways to get my exact thoughts. So yeah, I'm definitely a lot more optimistic about the War of the Rohirrim than I am with anything Amazon's doing with the Lord of the Rings property. And also the fact that it's got a lot of the same creative team involved with the Lord of the Rings. I feel like this movie will definitely take some creative liberties, which is fine, because the Lord of the Rings movies did themselves. There's quite a bit of creative liberties. However, even the creative liberties that they took they still felt in line with the spirit of Tolkien, and nothing really, there weren't any glaring problems that I had personally with like any of the changes they made to the lore. Like, really one of the biggest things that I can think of was the elves showing up in Helm's Deep in the Two Towers, because they didn't do that in the books, and it didn't make a whole lot of sense. It looked really cool, which is why they added that into the movie, is because, like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if elves showed up? But other than that, that's probably one of the only, and again, that's more of a nitpick for me personally. Like, I don't hate that they added the elves into the Two Towers in the Battle of Helm's Deep. But yeah, so those are my thoughts. I'm still trying to tamper my, because I don't want to get like super excited and end up being disappointed if it does turn out to be a not good movie. But I'm still, like I said, a lot more optimistic, and I'm a lot more hopeful for this movie. And again, I like the fact that they decided to take a very self-contained and isolated story set in Middle-earth and tell this, because there is quite a bit that they can pull from in the appendices of The Return of the King, and so I like the fact that they chose this, and the fact that they decided to, rather than do like a live-action movie, I think it's interesting that they wanted to go anime with it, although I do think I'd maybe prefer to see it live-action. But anywho, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up before I ramble on, but those are my thoughts. What do you think about the trailer? What are your expectations? Are you hoping this movie will be good? Do you think it'll be good? Or are you very much on the fence and think that this will be, Heather will just be another, like, girl boss character? But do usual YouTube-y stuff. Like and comment and subscribe and share and all that jazz. But till next, everyone, cheers.